My name is Patrick Donnelly, and I'm on a mission to build better leaders. On today's episode, I had the incredible privilege of talking with classmates and colleagues, Secretary of the Air Force number 24, Dr. Heather Wilson, and Chief of Staff of the Air Force number 21, General Dave Goldfein. Two leaders who shaped the Air Force and my own growth as an Air Force leader. Fresh off the release of their new book, Get Back Up, Lessons in Servant Leadership, Wilson and Goldfein shared some great stories and deep thoughts on leadership success. I was motivated by their unique backgrounds and perspectives and inspired by their humility and kindness. I'm confident you will be too. So enough from me. Here's Get Back Up. Dr. Wilson, General Goldfein, thanks so much for joining us today on Building Better Leaders.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. Just so that the audience knows, Dr. Wilson, Heather Wilson, Air Force Academy graduate, Rhodes Scholar, PhD, Congresswoman, two-time university president, I think just two times or more?
Just two.
Just two, that's plenty. Secretary of the Air Force, number 24, from 2017 to 2019. General retired Dave Goldfein, Air Force Academy graduate, fighter pilot, combat leader, CSAF, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, number 21, now our corporate senior advisor and chairman of the board for Google Public Sector and USO. I got to tell you, as a new guy doing a new podcast, having people of your stature is really an amazing thing. Thank you so much for coming
Patrick,
on.
you put that stuff in a resume, they never check. You just kind of make it.
Right. I remember having grown up in the Air Force in the midst of y'all's amazing accomplishments. I remember taking pride in each of those things as an Academy graduate myself, thinking, wow, look at these graduates who are doing amazing things. I remember celebrating your election victory and just thinking, gosh, this is wonderful that our institution is producing people of this caliber. So I'm really amazed and thankful that you would join me. Thank you.
Okay, what class were you?
A class of 91.
I'm starting to feel old, man.
91, yeah. So I was interviewing Lieutenant General France just about an hour ago. He's class of 92, and I was really hoping to share with him that I am claiming success. I am claiming credit for the success he's had because it was my class that obviously created the leader that he is.
That's right. You trained him, right?
I did.
Did he remind you that you made him do push-ups or anything?
He didn't, unfortunately. I think he was worried I might challenge him again. But yeah, it's amazing when you see people who have gone on to do bigger and better things, and then you think, gosh, I knew that person when, and it's a source of great pride to feel like, I may not be where they are or didn't achieve what they did, but I know them and I know who they are, and there's a connection there. Yeah. Which, whether it's the Air Force Academy or the Air Force, those connections are deep and important. And so, thanks again. We're here really. You're here at this conference for maybe a number of reasons, but the biggest one perhaps is the release of your new book, and it's called Get Back Up, Lessons in Servant Leadership. And congratulations, by the way. It's a great read. For those people who have not yet seen this or haven't had a chance, I highly recommend it, and we will give you some information here at the end on how you can get a copy for yourself. Now, on the cover, it has slightly younger General Goldfein and Dr. Wilson on the cover. And some people might look at this and say, well, Secretary of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, this is just a memoir of our time together, those senior leaders of Air Force leadership, and not know the backstory that really went into it. So I was wondering, do you mind sharing a little bit of the origin story that led to why this book made so much sense?
Well, Dave and I started at the Air Force Academy the same day. So
wow.
we raised our right hand and took that oath in the same day, the same place, the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And our professional paths went in different directions, although they crossed at different times. And then we ended up in our last tour of duty, if you will, as the chief and the secretary of the Air Force. And so along the way, we learned lessons in leadership. And about 2 years ago, we were together, and I said, you know, Dave, you got to write down some of these stories. And he said, well, you know, I've tried with a couple of other authors, or it hasn't really worked. And I said, well, look, why don't we do one together, but focused on junior leaders and telling some stories and getting some stories down that I've heard him tell. And so that's what we did.
Wow, it's a very enjoyable book. So you started at the Air Force Academy on the same day, and then you found yourself at the culmination of your Air Force careers, right there working together at the senior-most levels. And so this really is a collection of stories that crosses a period of time, really from, 1982 is your class, so really from 78 all the way upon retirement from the Air Force, essentially. I want to take a second, because I think that's an amazing coincidence in some ways, but it's that subtitle that I think is also interesting, Lessons in Servant Leadership. And I'm curious, what did you mean by the term servant leadership? I hear people use that term a lot, and I'm never exactly sure, what do you mean by that? So was there intentionality in that subtitle?
One of our chapters in the book is titled, Am I Worthy? And the whole idea of this chapter is the recognition that both of us learned on our individual journeys and then working together, that leadership is a gift. And it's a gift offered by those you're privileged to serve as a leader. And every day you're privileged to be in that position, you got to earn and re-earn that gift. And you earn and re-earn that gift every day by your character and your competence and your courage. And so what we wanted to capture for the next generation of leaders are these lessons that we learned about earning that gift. It's about who you are as a leader. It's about the decisions you make when nobody's watching. It's about asking yourself that question in the mirror every day. Am I worthy of the trust and the confidence of these young men and women, the greatest treasure in our nation's arsenal, who have stood there, raised their right hands, and committed to serve? Am I worthy of this gift of leadership? Am I worthy of the trust and confidence of the American people, the parents of these young airmen who have entrusted them to our care? Are we worthy to stand before our grandchildren, 9 and potentially growing to more, that if they choose a life of servant leadership, they can look up to their grandparents as examples? That's the gift of leadership. And so part of what we try to share is that humility associated with true servant leadership. And we try to share the fact that this journey towards inspirational servant leadership is a journey that never ends. I mean, I will just tell you that I'm not the leader that I want to be, but I'm still working on it, and everyone should. Am I worthy? Please God, I hope so.
I wonder if, I think that's a wonderful thing, and in the Doolittle Leadership Center, I travel around the world teaching leader development workshops, and when we talk about leadership, we're focused very much on the practical side of leadership. What do I do when I show up at work tomorrow? And sometimes I'll ask the class, how do you view leadership? And they'll say, well, a leader should be a servant leader. And I completely agree with that for all the reasons you just said. And yet, just to slight nuance, I think servant leadership is who leaders are. It's if I'm going to be a leader, who I should be is a servant, but what I do is slightly different from that in terms of the practical leading. Sometimes I'll see that there are people who say, well, I'm a servant leader, and I will do all of the things that everybody else can do. I'll do things that airmen can do because I'm really trying to avoid the hard things that only the leader can do.
So I think Dave's chapter on Am I Worthy, we struggled with whether we should title the book that as opposed to Get Back Up. But that question of servant leadership, I think as a leader, I do a lot of one-on-ones with my direct subordinates. And I'm not a micromanager. We have a mission. We manage resources. I get good people. I let them do their jobs. But when in our one-on-ones, when we're trying to get the update, what's going on, and so forth, and kind of check signals, if you will, probably the most important question I ask them as a leader is, what do you need from me that you're not getting? And I can't write $1 million check, but what do they need from me? And as a leader and as a servant leader, you need to be constantly looking at, all right, how do I help my people be even better at what they're doing to accomplish the overall mission?
Right.
And so that question of, what do you need from me that you're not getting? And it's amazing the number of times that people when I first ask them that, if they're just joining the team or even as a Secretary of the Air Force, it startles people. Because sometimes people don't think, but that's a leader's job, is to make sure that your team has what they need to succeed in the mission.
Right.
I was just going to add to that. I think it's really important and we talk about this in the book, the difference between character and reputation. So character is who we are, the decisions we make when no one's watching, right? Reputation is what others think we are after watching us for some period of time. If we focus on the first, the second will always take care of itself.
Right.
But the reverse is not always true. And so it really comes down to character in a leader. We just came out of the session we did, earlier, and this session, and most listeners or watchers are not going to remember specifically what we say or do. They are going to recognize how we make them feel. That's such and how we make them feel in many ways is the essence of our character.
Yeah, that's great. How you make them feel. Again, I'm going to refer to this leadership model that we use just because I think it's relevant here. We say there's 3 things that a leader has to do to be successful. They have to lead, they have to develop, and they have to care for the people that work for them. And what you're talking about is that care side. If you want to develop and lead someone well, oftentimes it starts with the care. It's, am I listening? Am I seeking? What do you need from me? And am I communicating to you that I see you? I see you as a person. And when you make that connection, then you can start to transfer into, how do I develop you more effectively? How do I lead you to a mission accomplishment more effectively? But it oftentimes does start with that care piece that really opens the door.
One of the things in the book is that is probably, could be a chapter itself, but it's really in the epilogue. And and throughout the book, when people read it, you get a good sense that something that matters to both of us is our families. And we actually dedicate the book to our grandchildren. And but most people work not just for the mission. They're putting food on the table. But you can engage them more in the mission if you care about them and their families.
Absolutely.
Your families are important to the people who work with and for you, whom you're trying to lead. And if you recognize that and allow people to make sure that their obligations as family members are taken care of in addition to the mission, people will be loyal to you and to the mission, even if they might be able to make more money someplace else.
Right.
And so that care and recognition that people are trying to make a better life for people they love, and both their family and the broader community is an important part of leadership.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's one of the things that separates military service from just being out in corporate America. I hear when I was in the Air Force, I'd have classmates that would leave and they would go join corporate America. And at some point I'd be like, yeah, I'm thinking about getting out. And be like, wait, hold on. Really think through that because it's different. Everything is different on the outside. And it's that sense of we're all in this together. And the Air Force is a family that cares for one another as families, as opposed to just what's the bottom line that I'm engaged in.
That's true in some cultures, and every business has its own culture. But I would say that great leaders, no matter whether they're in corporate America or higher education or local government or the military or law enforcement, if you're, you know, if you are a leader and you recognize that the people who are working for you have lives and dimensions to them that aren't just about work, and you make sure that they can take care of their families, you will have very loyal employees.
I always enjoy talking to CEOs, and I tell them, I can't think of a single reason why you would want to hire a veteran, with the exception of just a couple. One, they have a set of core values that are instilled in them in the first very day of basic training, whether Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force. So they have this set of core values based on their character that they've been expected to live up to this entire time. They have incredible work ethic because, you know, they don't get paid based on, you know, clicking a time card. They get paid based on their rank. So you have folks that actually know how to roll up their sleeves, join a team, and get something done, and are willing to work long hours, deploy, you know, do all kinds of things. And other than that, and then the only other thing you really have is you got loyalty, because they probably stayed in that service for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as opposed to, you know, jumping from ship to ship based on what the next paycheck is. So, gosh, with the exception of, you know, core values, incredible work ethic, and loyalty, I can't think of why you'd want to hire a veteran.
Right. It's a great story. When I was reading your book, you both talked about the point where you were making the decision to go to the Air Force Academy. And it struck me the importance of mentors in each of your lives. Different and yet both really important. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about the mentors that helped crystallize your decision to step into the Air Force.
So I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I didn't know how I was going to go to college, but I knew I was going to go. And my father died when I was quite young, but he was an aviator. My grandfather was an aviator. My grandfather was one of the first pilots in the RAF in World War I. And then he came to America in 1922 and was a barnstormer and opened aviation around New England, and was one of the flyers who started the Civil Air Patrol in the Second World War. Wow. So I grew up around aviators. And you know, you think about it. My dad went into the Air Force right after World War II. He was enlisted, was a mechanic, and then he came out of the service and was a commercial pilot. And this was the early 1960s, mid 1950s, and he went back home, married his high school sweetheart, my mom, and he taught my mom how to fly.
Is that right?
You know, at a time when a lot of women weren't even driving, right? He taught my mom how to fly. They rebuilt an airplane together, and my dad also built an experimental open cockpit biplane. But my grandfather was still alive when I was in high school, and in 1976, they opened the Air Force Academy to women. And I went to talk to my grandfather about it. And I still remember him sitting there, and so in his living room, and so he had 2 sons and 5 grandsons and me. And I was the one that was thinking about this Air Force Academy thing, but we were pretty close. And I told him I was thinking about it, and he got real quiet, and he said, well, you know, I flew with some women in World War II, towing targets and ferrying airplanes, the Wasps. They were pretty good sticks. So I guess that'd be okay. And I applied and was accepted to the academy, and I went to see him just before I left, and you know, my grandfather was a tough Scot, flown in 2 world wars, been through the Depression. He was a pretty tough guy. The only time I ever saw him cry was the day I left.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were very close, and so it was in part that inspiration from that family connection, which is like a lot of airmen. Yeah. You know?
It's powerful. It's a powerful motivator. There's a picture there of somebody that has done it, and you feel like there's a sense of pride that you're carrying it on. Yeah, it's a wonderful story. Sir?
So one of the chapters in the book is Find Your Purpose. And I share the story of my journey to the academy, which started with a rejection letter that basically, for the class of 81, that said, you were not selected because, and this is before the internet, right? So I just got a piece of paper that said, you were not selected because, and all I remember is every box was checked.
Okay.
So I went off to the prep school, and my father was a Vietnam veteran, fighter pilot, very influential in my lives and the lives of my brothers. Older brother was at the academy, cadet wing commander. Younger brother came into the academy, and I found that for the first 2 years I struggled with, I used to say that I was on academic probation, restriction, but at least athletically, I was slow. So we made this mutual decision that I needed to get out and get my act together. And so I got this incredible opportunity to be a roadie for Harry Chapin. Now, many of our listeners and watchers, right, they have an assignment now to go look Harry Chapin up, right? Because they're too young to remember. But people don't know that Harry Chapin actually went to the Air Force Academy.
I did not know that before reading your book.
And he was in the early 60s, and he made it through basic training and left and found his way to New York, where he started a band with his brothers and drove a taxi. And he wrote this song, Taxi, which became the #1 song, right? While I was on this trip, trying to join him as a roadie, we lost contact, so I ended up riding a bicycle across the country for an entire year and meeting these incredible, Americans on the back roads of America who took me in, right, who took care of me. And I came to the conclusion that this nation and those Americans that I met are worth defending. And so, from a mentoring standpoint, I count many of them as mentors to me because they taught me about the hardworking American people who get up every day, to your point about families. They care about their families. They want a better life for their kids. And you know what? They deserve a military who stands for them. And so when I came back to the academy, I came back with purpose. I came back with embracing the ideals of what the academy stands for. And I love going out to talk to cadets when I was in as chief, and I'd say, hey, every one of you is on some part of this journey. Some of you are fighting the system, and some of you have embraced it. All I can tell you is my last 2 years were a lot more fun than my first 2.
Right.
The sooner you can embrace this and find your purpose, the better experience this is going to be.
So in some ways you were fortunate because you both had these examples within your homes or in your growing up that kind of was this picture of what might life in the Air Force look like, or at least a life flying. What would you say to young people who really don't have a mentor? Nobody in their life sort of stands out to them as somebody that's kind of calling them to something bigger and better, that they can look to as an example or exemplar for where am I going and why am I going there? What would you advise young people who are in that situation?
I think that the United States military is one of the best places to go for young people who are searching or who don't have a lot of structure in their lives. And I'll tell you, I told you my dad died and my grandfather was important to me, but I didn't tell you that my stepfather was an alcoholic. And my parents were divorced when my mom divorced my stepfather when I was a senior in high school. And there were things that I didn't like that were going on in my family, and I knew that I wanted to make some different choices. And while the Air Force Academy was new, it was challenging, I was a kid that seemed to rise to those kind of things, I also knew that going home was not an option.
I see.
And it didn't feel like an option to me anyway. And so I was driven in another way to find a different path, and the military provided that for me. And a structure and a sense of purpose that was much bigger than I had ever found anyplace else. And so I work now with half of our students at UTEP are first in their family to go to college. 35% of my students at the University of Texas at El Paso come from families making less than $20,000 a year. Education is the pathway to a better life.
Right.
So every kid in high school should be planning, and what was good enough for our parents or grandparents is not good enough for our grandchildren. Every kid in America needs to be planning to go to college or technical training or into the military after high school.
Yeah.
And the service is a great way to build your own life with the values that you want.
Yeah. Sir?
I was just going to add that we did a recruiting video early on in my time as chief, and we were together. And it was me talking to my younger self. And it was basically said, if I had only known that I was joining an organization where the men and women to my right and left were going to be my brothers and sisters, where I was going to be part of something much bigger than myself, where I was going to learn core values, where I was going to learn loyalty, when I was going to learn, I said, boy, if I had only knew that, growing up, what I was getting into, I would have been far more eager to come join this organization. I think the same thing is true today.
So the mentor was helpful in the sense of kind of give you an initial direction, but it was, I think what I heard you both saying there is you don't have to know the end before you decide that this is a good idea. It's actually upon coming in, you realize the benefit that can really advance, whether you stay in 4 years or 40 years.
Well, and you're right. You don't know that. None of us know what the doors and opportunities are going to be out there. Sometimes we look backwards at our life and think and describe it as if it was a straight line. It was foreordained, and it's really not. You're making choices as you go along. And one of the chapters in the book is called "Take the Shot." And after our freshman year at the academy, I needed to take a summer course because I was going to die academically. In the next fall. It was just way too much. And so I took computer science, which was new at the time. When this was 1979. There was a mainframe in the basement. This was not, IBM hadn't made the first desktop, so it was pretty new. But I liked it. It was a semester crammed into 3 weeks. It seemed to make sense to me, and I ended up tutoring the other students in the class of 30 or so who were trying to get through. And this captain, I don't even remember his name, but he changed my life he could have changed my life in an even bigger way. But the first thing was, he said, you're pretty good at this computer science stuff. Maybe you ought to major in it. And I thought, nah, I'm not sure this computer science thing's really going to stick. I was going to be, maybe not. But and then he said, and if you'd stop doing all this extracurricular stuff and focus on your academics, you could be a Rhodes Scholar or something. I had no idea what he was talking about. As far as I knew, the Rhodes Scholarship was like Department of Transportation or something, right? But he told me I couldn't do it. So maybe he knew a little bit more about me than I knew about myself. If somebody said I couldn't do something, I was at least going to find out what he thought I couldn't do.
Right.
And so I went to this one-person office on the top floor of the academic building there at the Air Force Academy, and a woman named Mrs. Fern Kenyon, I still remember her name. She had, this was pre-internet, you couldn't Google anything, but she had these 3-ring binders about graduate scholarships, and I started learning those things, and she said, you can come back anytime. Well, my grades actually weren't all that great for Rhodes, and they allowed me to apply, but I had to interview with a bunch of faculty members to earn the right to finally apply, and they were a little worried about my grades, and I managed to get through that. I didn't end up applying for other scholarships where GPA mattered more. But I'll tell you this, 31 of the 32 of us chosen as Rhodes Scholars that year thought we were the one mistake.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Interesting.
Well, the other guy was a jerk. And my point is that so many people think they're not the right one. I find this particularly among women. That they say, well, I'm not really fully qualified. I don't meet 100% of the requirements or whatever. And they don't take the shot. But I think Wayne Gretzky was right. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
That's right.
And I've lived a blessed life. I've had tremendous opportunities and a lot of grace. But my resume doesn't say that I am not a Marshall Scholar because my grades weren't good enough for the Academy to let me apply.
Right.
It doesn't say that Brown University didn't admit me as an undergraduate. There's a whole lot of, it doesn't give you the list of jobs that I haven't been, offered or something. It doesn't say that, I'm not a United States Senator. I lost a race for the Senate, but you can find that on Wikipedia, I suppose. But you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Mm. So when I talk to my students now, my high-performing students who sometimes doubt themselves, I tell them, look, take the shot. Just take the shot.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing.
That's a great story. How many times did I get selected for something because the three people who finished above me, for whatever reason, couldn't do it? And suddenly, well, do you still want it? Yeah, I'll take it. And the only reason I was considered is because I put my name in. And then that changes your future.
And as a leader, most leaders, and you get to certainly our point in professional lives, I've hired hundreds of people over the years. There's always a point in the hiring process that I call the Mr. Potato Head moment, where I like her ears and I like his hat and that nose, and you're making compromises based on what the organization needs at that time. Almost no one meets all of the requirements for a job, but you need to put your name in, even if you say, well, I get 80% of the requirements that are listed on this job announcement. I'll at least put my name in.
Right.
And you'd be surprised.
That's such good advice. That's for anybody at whatever level. That's really good advice. You're not going to be selected if you don't put your name in. So, General Goldfein, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit away from this book, but I think it's still tied to it, and it's from your earlier book, Sharing Success, Owning Failure. This is a quote I use in every single leader development workshop that we teach. And you say, as a leader, one of your key roles is to teach, to develop those entrusted to your care to their fullest potential and prepare them for future leadership challenges. Now, when I teach this in our workshops, I change leader to, you have as a commander. I've changed it to leader. And I'll ask the class, say, do you agree with this? And I've not yet had one single person that says, I don't agree. Everybody, every time says, yes, this is one of our jobs. And yet, what you say is really intense here. It says one of your key roles is to develop those entrusted to their fullest potential. So I say, okay, you've all agreed to this. What makes this difficult? And 100% of the time, people say, I don't have time. I don't have time. I agree that this is important. General Goldfein has given us the right answer, but I don't know how to do that given everything else that I have to do. How would either of you advise people who find themselves in that situation of, I know this is a role that I have. I think it fits nicely with the stories that you tell in your book. It's a role as leaders that we have, but how do I do it in the midst of everything else that's going on?
Here's one trick that I've found. Maybe this will be in the chapter of the next book or something, but when you look at how adults learn, 70% of the things that we learn are not in formal courses, and they're not by reading, although I like both of those things. 70% of the things people learn is through doing things. And one of the best ways, and the military does this naturally because we move people around every 3 years, but is to cross-train or to reassign. Give people both additional duties or give them an assignment in another area and make them stretch and grow.
Okay.
Because it's through doing the work that people learn the lessons throughout their careers. So formal training and mentorship and so forth is great, but the base has to be what they're really being asked to do in the workplace.
I see. So part of the development is looking for opportunities that stretch them, that they're going to be self-developing in this new situation.
And good organizations will, the military does this at a certain level, but to identify succession planning down several levels from where you are as a leader to say, okay, here's who we have now. Who do we have that's going to be ready in 3 years and 5 years? Who are our high potential 150 people in my organization? And then how do I systematically develop them so that in 3 or 5 years, they are no question ready?
They're ready to go.
So when I was a young major, I got to serve as aide-de-camp for then Lieutenant General Mike Ryan, who went on to become Chief Staff of the Air Force. He taught me a ton of things. One of the things I took from him was the 3 Ds of successful leadership. Do, delegate, delete. Do only those things that you can do. Delegate everything else. And every once in a while, select all, delete is good for the soul. So what is the things that only you can do as a leader? I think it, in a very basic sense, it can come down to vision and environment. You owe it to the organization to lay out the vision for where the organization's going, but most importantly, why this is important. Simon Sinek, his book, Start With Why, is so critically important to successful leadership because it's actually easier to tell them what. It's easier to actually dictate how. It's really hard, but critically important that you start with why. And then once you've laid out the vision, and if you've done it in a way that's inclusive, where you've taken in and listened. I used to say when I was a young leader, I wanted to be known as somebody that was really decisive. As I matured, I realized I really wanted to become known as someone who made good decisions.
Yeah.
And so in the do category, vision and environment. Environment is the essence of your question. If you create the environment where people can do their absolute best work, then you have succeeded in actually helping them achieve the vision that you've laid out.
I see.
That development, that investment that you spend in your time with your young folks by doing only what you can do, laying out the vision, by delegating everything else, which actually also delegates a level of trust that you're saying to your subordinates that says, I got your back. I'm giving you the resources. I'm giving you the why, and I'm letting you figure out the how. Developing that environment for people to give you the very best is something that I think is an essence of successful leadership.
I would say that one of the things Dave does well as a leader, in that we can talk about what's the vision, but he was always able to tie stories. There's a chapter in the book about tell your story. History, when we study history, and history of the service or history of higher ed or your company or whatever, history can make us smart, but heritage makes us proud. And being able to tell the story, every airman has a story, and to be able to tell those stories in ways that engage the rest of the team in a way that understands this is what we value, this is what right looks like, because this is what we celebrate, this is what we honor. And that chapter about telling stories is the story of John Chapman, whose Medal of Honor
Powerful
was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, and how that happened, and then how we sought to celebrate and honor him with his family.
What I like about what you both just said is that development is something that every individual owns. Like, I can't develop someone who's not willing to be developed. There is a responsibility I have as a person growing to what can I be doing to collect more tools or become more capable. But what you're saying is, while I have an individual responsibility, my leader has a responsibility of creating an environment in which these tools that I've collected and these opportunities that I'm given are allowed to be fully realized, so they become part of who I am. Is that fair?
It is. And something else I would offer perhaps in the courses you're teaching, right, is when you get a response that says, I don't know where I find the time to develop. it's a worthy question then to ask, well, then how are you spending your time?
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing only that which you can do as a leader? Because
Right.
I would argue when it comes to the development of those that are going to potentially eventually replace you,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have time not to do that.
Right.
You don't have time not to invest in the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think as leaders, we probably spent more time on developing the next generation of those who would replace us as we did on anything else we did as Secretary-in-Chief.
And it's even harder in the military than it is in other organizations because, in other organizations, if you look internally and you say, yeah, we really don't have a really good next vice president for human resources, we can do a national search for that one. Well, if you don't have in the Air Force, you have what you've developed internally and what you're promoting.
Right.
And it's not an option to do a national search and bring somebody in as a general. I mean, it's just that's not going to happen. So you have to develop your talent. And we did. We spent a lot of time on looking deeper down into the pool of officers and making sure we were developing people for the long term.
Yeah, that's really good. That check on I'm very busy, or all of these things only I can do. And sometimes I think we have a tendency to, I want to keep these because I'm pretty comfortable with doing them, and they fill up my schedule with things I'm comfortable with, when in reality we could move some of that on and get to some of those things maybe we're less comfortable with.
Yeah, I have another tool I use as a leader, and it looks at my time. And I sometimes go back and check it, and I look at my schedule to say, am I really spending the time on the things that only I can do? Or is it getting, is my schedule getting sucked up with whoever was the most persistent and said, we really, really, really want you to do this? And doing that time audit of are you really doing what only you can do as the leader? Are you really hitting your highest priorities? It's actually vital.
Yeah, such a great check for leaders. Let me ask you another question. One of the chapters in your book is called Trust Your Gut. And I wonder, we could talk about trust your gut a little bit, about how do you know when your gut is telling you the right thing? And then contrasting that with another piece of the book, which is be aware of your blind spots. It seems to me that those two things, if we're not careful, can actually work against each other. So I'm just curious, what do you think about that?
So I'll talk about, first of all, I'll talk about blind spots. So I'm a believer that every senior officer that is successful was raised by great NCOs. I'm certainly
Absolutely
a recipient of that.
Mm-hmm.
And my first chief that I ever had, Chief Jimmy Kelly, taught me an incredible lesson that we share in the book.
Mm-hmm.
He walked in my office one day. I'm squadron commander at Aviano Air Base, and he walks in. He goes, "Hey, Chief," he goes, "this ought to make you mad because it makes a lot of your airmen mad." I looked at it and I said, "Okay, well, what are we talking about here?" And he said, "Well, read the box." I said, "Okay, Johnson & Johnson, flesh-colored Band-Aids." And he said, "Ought to make you mad because it makes a lot of your airmen mad." And I said, "Man, I ain't getting it. What are you trying to tell me here?" He said, "Well, sir, let me show you." And he takes out a pink Band-Aid, puts it on his African-American skin and says, "Ought to make you mad. Makes a lot of your airmen mad." Then he walked off, right? So I sat there and thought, what was the lesson? I couldn't see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What other color would flesh-colored Band-Aids be? In terms of me and my growing up, my life experiences. So we all have blind spots as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with a little bit of humility to acknowledge that there are certain things in our organization that we cannot see, we will not see. It's not because we're incapable, it's not because we're incompetent, it's because our life experiences have given us, a lens through which we look. And the only way we're going to ever recognize those blind spots is to build teams around us that see things from a different perspective, right? George Marshall, once called his entire staff in. It's a great line. He said, "I want you to know I'm disappointed. I'm extremely disappointed in all of you." And he waited for them to look at him like, "What's going on?" And he said, "Not one of you have disagreed with me for 2 weeks." The lesson here is that if we're going to be successful, we got to start by recognizing that we have blind spots, and then realize that we got to build teams around us that perhaps don't look like us or sound like us,
Right.
that have had a different life journey,
Mm-hmm.
that can look at the same exact problem from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
The trusting your gut piece, if you go back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, by the way, he was we're going to do a session with him, and he's a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
In his book, Blink, he talks about how, if you can hone your gut instincts and understand your gut instincts, very often they will be the initial gut reaction can over time become some of your best decisions. Again, decisive or making good decisions. And if you can understand what your gut reaction is to things, because your gut reaction is based on a character, competence, the journey that you've been on, all these things that come together. If you're going to deviate from your gut reaction, do it consciously. If not, then what you may find is that someone else will talk you into something that you knew in your gut was perhaps not the right outcome,
Right.
but when you went with it. And the lesson that we offer in the book is think about that gut instinct, hone it over time, and use it. Not to say that you won't change your mind, that you won't squint with your ears, that you won't, go a different direction once you learn more, but always be cognizant of that gut reaction when you're making a decision.
Actually, Malcolm Gladwell's book, which I love the book Blink, but what it really says is as you are developing as a leader, you're gaining experiences in the world that many of the people who work for you won't yet have had.
Right.
And it is that whole brain integration without even conscious thought of you've done something for so long that you know what the situation is, even if you can't completely articulate it, and you're it's a developed instinct about when something's not quite right, and you know it's not quite right, even if you can't articulate it. And that instinct of a leader is a very valuable thing to listen to.
So is there a way then to both develop your gut so that it's leading you towards good decisions, and also developing your gut in such a way that you are aware of blind spots that you may have?
Well, I'm the president of a university. I'm an academic with a non-academic work history, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been president of 2 universities, but I didn't come up through academia. I have a leadership team at the university that comes from a lot of different backgrounds. And I have a provost and vice president for academic affairs who is a longtime academic. If he says something to me and I need to listen very carefully to him,
Mm-hmm.
because he will have experienced and seen things in a very different way from what my experience has been. And if we differ, we need to go deep on why. If my instinct is different, I don't completely ignore what he says, but it means we've got to talk this through more. And even when Dave and I served together, he had tremendous depth of operational experience and understanding of the Pentagon and the Joint Staff and those dynamics that I didn't have. And that expertise was really valuable. At the same time, I had 10 years serving in Congress and running large public organizations and so forth. And there were often times where we would talk through things, and by doing that, come to a completely different solution than either of us started with. So we made each other. Dave made me a better secretary. Steel sharpens steel. And we both brought something to the table. But I knew I had huge blind spots because I just did not have, I left the service as a captain. I had never served in the Pentagon before. And so there were a lot of things I didn't know.
I would say that you made me a better chief because you brought a perspective from, academia, from science and technology, from so many areas. So we were able to look at the exact same problem from 2 different lenses and be able to talk through that. There's with the exception of character, I think one could argue that there's not many things in the leadership journey that are black and white, that are 0 or 1.
That's what makes it so difficult.
Most of them are. It's sort of gray, right? And you got to think your way through them. So it ought not be surprising that when we talk about trusting your gut and blind spots, it's not an either or.
Right.
We have to be aware of both. Right? We have to be humble enough to realize that there are things going on in the organ. I mean, I tell when I get a chance to talk to young commanders, especially, I tell them, look, there are things going on in your organization right now that you cannot see, and you will never see unless you have folks that are around you or that are willing to point them out to you. It's not because you're incompetent. It's not because you're incapable. It's just the nature of the human dimension of leadership.
Right.
So I don't think it's actually an either or when it comes to blind spots and trusting your gut. I think it's a both.
Yeah. I think that's good. I mean, clearly, the more experience you have, the more you've honed those instincts, the better you're going to be. And yet holding out the possibility that, but I might not be seeing everything is a wise move.
One of the things that I think characterizes a servant leader is the humility to know that you might be wrong. And to go into conversations and ask questions, not asking to refute, but asking to understand.
Right.
And those conversations, that willingness to listen, to understand, is something that is I think is a characteristic of a good servant leader. That humility to know I don't know everything and I might be wrong. I don't find that paralyzes me as a leader, but I tell people I was the smartest I ever was in life when I was 18. And the rest of my life, I have been learning how much I really don't know. Yeah.
I think a lot of us can identify with that sentiment.
I want to add one thought because you made me think of one thing that we talked a lot about. So the way we would manage senior leadership was, right, I would come to the secretary with a recommendation, let's say for, these 2 or 3 people for the next job, and I'd talk through each, right? And then it was always the secretary who had the responsibility and authority to make the nomination for a senior general officer. One of the things that I did spent a lot of time on that individual was ask the question, are they still growing? Are they still curious? Are they still listening? Are they humble? Are they willing to admit that maybe they don't have it all? Because there is the potential when someone gets to a certain point to think, I got it all figured out.
Right.
And when they have it all figured out and they know exactly where they need to go, that actually may be a good time to retire.
Right.
Because what that means is they're not willing to grow while they're in the position. To listen, to learn, to expand themselves, to spread their own wings as they develop and nurture and build the vision and the environment for that organization to be successful.
One thing just that you remind me of, when I talk to leaders whom I admire, leaders who in whatever walk of life, corporate life, the military, higher education, public service, almost every leader whom I admire, if I ask them, what are you reading? It leads to a 20-minute conversation. I don't know of any great leader who isn't a learner at some level and constantly trying to collect more tools and learn and reflect and add some different perspective. And now, of course, we can also listen, whether it's a podcast or an audiobook. There's so many more things that we can do now that are not just books, but it's that, what are you reading? Or what did you read in the last year that was most interesting? And it usually leads to a fascinating conversation.
Yeah. And that learning is just part of who they are, not because they're learning for a particular purpose, but it's just part of who they are.
They're growing.
Yeah.
They're continuing to grow.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny, your story reminded me, we've taught over 2,200 students in the last 2 years from all around the world, from 06 down to brand new first-time supervisors. And we give a survey at the end to see, are we giving them something that's valuable or not. And about 99% of the people say this is either extremely helpful or helpful. And about 75% say extremely helpful. So we've seen this now over and over again. We know this is something that is in need. But one day, I got the surveys back, and somebody has said, well, it's marginally helpful. I was like, oh, okay, what can we do? What can we do better? And this was a second lieutenant, and his one answer in the narrative was, I learned all this in ROTC. I'm like, wow, you've been in less than a year, and you've learned all of this, and we've got senior master sergeants and chiefs who say this is extremely helpful to my leadership. But this person had learned it all in our first ROTC. It just is a bad sign for the future if you've already got it figured out and you're not willing to be humble and admit there's probably more that I can learn.
So in high school, I got to work at the commissary bagging groceries. Mm-hmm. And I've told people over the years that in many ways, my Charlie the bagger, who was my boss, my first boss I've worked for, taught me everything I ever needed to know about leadership, which was be kind, be professional, and don't mix the meat with the soap.
The first two I knew, the last one I did not, so I'm a better man as a result of not mixing meat and soap. The book has so many great stories, and I want to put another plug in for the listeners because we only touched on some of them. And in some ways, I'm glad because as people pick up the book, having not heard from us, they're going to be as surprised and enjoy the read as much as I did and hearing your individual stories. But I wonder, is there any other point that you'd like to make with regards to servant leadership or getting back up that you just feel like, boy, I really wanted a chance to mention this before we ended the podcast?
I think one of the best stories, and it was one of the reasons that I said to Dave, we need to do this, or you need to write these stories down. It's, we have a former chief of staff here, a great leader now out in industry and business, who was shot down in combat and was not just a lieutenant at the time, but was the commander.
Right.
And telling that story and how to not only be deeply grateful for those who took tremendous risks to come in and get him from behind enemy lines and get him out and back to his family, but how he handled what happened next. Just everybody looking to him to see whether, what does the commander do now? And the answer was he got back up.
Yeah.
He went flying. And I think that chapter is, to me, it was the reason we had to write this down. It's the reason for the book.
Yeah, that was a powerful story, and it was powerful not only because of the determination you had that I need to do this, period, but they need to see me do this. My actions are going to have an impact, and I need to get back up there as quickly as possible.
And I don't even know if I can do it justice, but that the next night when you went back out, you got the jet ready. This was at Aviano, and they open the hangar, and you start taxiing out, and the whole taxiway was lined by people from the squadron, people from across the base. The word got out, word of mouth, that he's going back up, and applauding, thumbs up, all of those things that they needed to see that. But they also wanted to support his choice to do that.
Right.
They were there for him, but he was their commander, and they were proud of him. And I just think that was it was a great moment, and a great story.
Yeah, it was a great story.
Well, so let me share one of my favorite chapters in the book, and the chapters. So for those who are reading it, we each chapter is a lesson that we share in servant leadership, whether it's trust your gut or squint with your ears. And one of my favorite chapters is shovel the snow. And this the story of Heather, who is a brand new university president, right? weeks into the job. And it's 70 degrees outside, and the students are out basking in the sunlight, and the meteorologist, walks in and says, I'm getting all my indications that we're going to have 40 inches of snow this weekend. And her answer is, you're kidding me, right? Right? And then she and her husband, Jay, drive out to the university after, of course, they wake up and it's just, sure enough, 40 inches of wet, snow. And the university's closed down. And she and her husband go out and grab some shovels and just start shoveling the snow to make sure that there's a safe walkway to get in and out of the student union. And a student comes out and looks at President Wilson. What are you doing? She goes, well, I'm just shoveling the snow. And he goes, hey, can you help? Or can I help? And he says, sure. So he goes and grabs some of his buddies, and they come out. And so the students and the football team and everybody comes out, and they all sort of restore the university. And the question she gets asked afterwards is, so what were you doing out there? That university presidents don't really do that. And her answer was pretty simple. It needed to be done.
Yeah.
And the leadership lesson there is that sometimes as leaders, we don't want to ask anyone to do something that we're not willing to do ourselves. And two, sometimes you just got to get out there and show the way. So there's a common thread in these two stories, right? Which is how you act as a leader very often is teaching the next generation.
Yeah. Boy, the power of leadership example, seeing the boss being willing to roll up their sleeves and do something. Suddenly there's no excuses and everybody's incentivized to jump in and be a part of the solution.
I also told them I'd buy them dinner. We did. We went into there was great. It was a great moment, even though it was a terrible day for the university. But we went into the student union. The students, there were 1,000 students living on campus, and there were enough of them who had worked in the cafeteria to feed everyone. And they hadn't lost power, so the students were feeding the students. We went in. We had chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes and gravy. And when I asked at South Dakota Mines, "You guys hungry?" I never remember a student saying no in answer to that question. Yeah. So, they got fed.
I think that's a common university experience.
It is very common. Yeah, food does not go to waste on a university campus.
Those are such good stories and so many others packed in here. We've talked about some of them, but I do want to just recommend it one more time. If you haven't seen this, if you're interested in a great leadership read and some amazing anecdotes, I highly recommend Get Back Up, Lessons in Servant Leadership. Where can people find this?
So military can get it for free from Air University Press, but if you go to getbackupleadership.com, there's links on there to go for an Audible version, for Kindle, for Amazon, for Air University Press. So you can just getbackupleadership.com, and you can pick your poison.
Fantastic. Sir.
Or it could be like my first leadership book, Sharing Success, Owning Failure, which is given for free at every purchase at the dollar store.
And don't mix that with the soap, right? Dr. Wilson, General Goldfein, thank you so much for joining me on Building Better Leaders. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Building Better Leaders. If you'd like to learn more about the Doolittle Leadership Center or the Leader Development Workshops we deliver all around the world, please visit us at afa.org/DLC. Helping you become a better leader is our passion and our purpose.